I'm Christine Curtis. I was born in Tampa, Florida as Christine Warner and grew up in Florida. I went to public schools in Florida, in Tampa, and started in first grade and went through sixth grade in Seminole Heights Elementary School, where we had decent teachers, but nothing great. Then started to junior high school. At that time, we had some science curriculum, but it was not, again, great. In fact, at times it was poor. During the fifth grade, one of the things that I remember was the launch of the first space shuttle, space mission into where it took, 3 minutes, something of that order. And we went and got our lunches from the lunchroom and sat down in the classroom and ate our lunch, which was unusual, and watched the TV. And it had an impact on me. It was an exciting time where we were, as a country, racing against the Soviets to try to increase our scientific expertise and increase our scientific manpower. And I got caught up in that to some degree. As a child, I felt that and I knew that the students over in the East Coast around Cape Canaveral were getting a much better education than I. That's where the money was being poured into the math and sciences. Of course, I had the scientific community in the Cape area that we did not have. And felt jealous at the time that we did not have that opportunity. Then I went into high school, which started with 10th through 12th grade. It was a big school. We had 3,000 students. It was very varied. We had students from many different backgrounds. From about 1960 on, we had a number of Cuban refugees involved in our school, some of whom were my friends. It made a very different type of environment than a normal Southern environment. I was exposed to many different types of people, many different backgrounds. They offered us the opportunity in high school to have accelerated classes, and there was a group of about 35 of us that had a number of classes together, and there were a number of very good students in that group. We had an accelerated math course, accelerated English, and then most of us were in the chemistry course. The chemistry course, I took two of them, one my junior year, 11th grade, and one my senior year, the 12th grade, that were very good. However, they were not as demanding as they should have been. If I have one indictment against my public school education, it was not demanding enough. They should have stretched us more. They should have given us more opportunity, more information, more opportunity to learn new materials. We spent an awful lot of time playing around. But when we did have, we were being seriously taught, we seriously learned. And it was, in fact, by the time I got to college, freshman chemistry, it was the third quarter of that freshman year before I saw something I did not know. So it was a good background, but it could have been better. Those years were very happy. They were a bit lonely, as many teenagers are lonely. They were challenging, but they could have been more challenging. I then went to Florida State University, and I enrolled in the honors program at Florida State, and was offered the opportunity to have honors chemistry. I also was in honors English and honors history. The problem was that my honors English was about 20 minutes from my honors chemistry, and I could not make it from honors chemistry to honors English in time. We only have 15 minutes between class. Judging from the first day of class, listening to the professors, I decided to drop honors chemistry and go into the regular chemistry. which turned out to be an excellent choice. The students in honors chemistry did not get the basic information and understanding of chemistry that we obtained in the general chemistry course. They were given more, perhaps, creative assignments, so they did not learn the basic knowledge. And many of them, some of whom were my friends, decided against a scientific career. I thoroughly enjoyed my freshman chemistry, and I guess that was a pivotal point which led me into chemistry as a discipline. At that time, I was thinking of going into biology, but that changed my mind. And I went and finished 2 years at Florida State. Then I went to Mercer University for 2 years and continued in chemistry. Became a lab assistant, and since there was no graduate program, I had a lot of responsibilities that a GTA and a graduate program would have. I monitored labs, I put out fires. We had a lot of medical students that I ended up teaching lab to. They invariably had fires, so we learned how to put them out and to try to teach them to be more careful. And again, I had some very good chemistry courses, and I had one or two that were not. If I had to complain about my education, it is that during that entire period, mathematics was downplayed in every school I was in. We were not given the stringent, rigorous mathematics background that was necessary. If you took the courses, they still didn't teach it to the rigor that was necessary. And I think we have a whole group of people, at least in my colleagues, that did not get the mathematics background that we need. And I think it was at the time when a lot of things were changing. It was not really creativity, but the whole person was being talked about, and they left a lot of rigor out. And I think that's a serious mistake. I think the mathematics for the scientists is absolutely necessary. We need to start stressing that at an early age. Make it fun for the young kids, make it rigorous for the older children, and for the college. It's just something that we cannot do without.
How would you compare the large FSU to a smaller university?
I went to started college in '68 at the right young age of 17. It was a very traumatic time. It was right at the beginning. We were really getting heavy into Vietnam. We had a number of demonstrations. We had bomb scares routinely. I took tests out in the parking lot, a chemistry test, third quarter, out in the parking lot of Diffenbach. I took history tests out in the Union courtyard because we had to get out of the buildings. It was a traumatic time. Florida State was not as involved as maybe Columbia and some of the northeastern schools. However, we had our own demonstrations. We had the sheriff, who we considered to be a redneck, and we were liberals, come and sit on campus. It was Kent State happened. I went to class one night, and we heard about Kent State. We were terrified. We had just walked by a demonstration. I was not personally involved, but I walked by many of them. And it was a very, very upsetting time. We didn't know who was going to go next, which of our friends would be going to Vietnam, which one would be killed. One amazing thing, I went to my 20th high school reunion, and none of my graduates, of the 741 of us, none of them were killed in Vietnam. But the year before there were, and the year after there were. We had GTAs in the graduate chemistry that were snatched out of their graduate program and sent to Vietnam. It was very traumatic. When I went to Mercer, it was a little different. It was it was a Baptist school, but it was not funded that much by the Baptists, but there were still remnants of that involved. It was a much calmer situation. It would have been a much more fun experience if it hadn't been located in Macon, Georgia. It was my first real experience with the southern, old-time southern living. The discrimination between the whites and the blacks was very, very apparent in Macon. The blacks were very poor in the general case. They were 40% of the population. It was very apparent. I found it very difficult to deal with as a very young person, and very difficult to accept. And I guess that's part of the reason why I'm currently involved and have been since the early 80s in trying to get fellowships for minorities and women in undergraduate, in graduate programs at Auburn. We have a very small black population in Auburn, and we have a 33% population in the state. We're not serving the people of the state of Alabama. And I can't do much, but I can do my small part in trying to get fellowships for these people and to recruit them into graduate studies. The people that, of course, that are trying to recruit are those that are very, very bright, very good students. They may not have had the educational background that they should have had, but they're sufficiently bright that they can pick up with extra help from us.
Why did you choose FSU?
Hmm?
Why did you choose FSU?
My dad was a man of few words. He was a second. His parents were immigrants from Germany, and he was a very busy man as I was growing up. He worked 2 jobs, worked for the city of Tampa as the assistant comptroller, and he worked as treasurer of all the Lutheran churches in Florida. And so every night he would work from about 7 o'clock till 10 o'clock when he would go to bed, get up at 6 a.m. and then go to work and then come home and do his other job. And he worked Saturdays and Sundays at home on his second job. The man, he hardly ever talked to me as a child. I now understand why he was plain tired. He worked 2 jobs. I do the same. I get so tired, I just don't speak. Now that he's retired, he talks up with like he's making up for lost time. But my father, a few words, said to me one day, "You have the choice of going to these different schools. This is what I can afford. I can afford Florida State, University of Florida, University of South Florida, which was in Tampa, and Newberry College." And Newberry College, because it was a Lutheran school, that's where my sister went. I had already evaluated what I considered the education at Newberry, and I considered it not to be what I wanted. It was not at the caliber that I wanted. So I chose Florida State. Florida State because University of Florida had a real party reputation. I did not want to be involved in the University of Florida. Florida State had a better academic reputation. The reason I did not choose USF was because it was at home and I wanted to get away. And basically, it did make me grow up rather fast to go to Florida State. It was a very traumatic time, but it did make those of us that stand on our own 2 feet and either make it or break it. And unfortunately, many did not make it through the Florida State that I went in with, but a goodly number of us did.
What do you mean, make it or break it? What were the...
Well, there was, like, my roommate, my freshman roommate who came from St. Pete. She was a very good high school student. She ended up attempting suicide several times. And her mother came and got her in the spring quarter. I never knew whatever happened to her. There were various instances like that. That was not the majority, but there were sufficient numbers of those that it made one be concerned about oneself that you didn't fall into that trap. Those were also the days where LSD was becoming a toy that certain people played with, and that was also present on campus. Marijuana was starting into its zone. Of course, alcohol was everywhere. It was somewhat not really like World War II, where people didn't know when they shipped out if they would be back alive or be alive the next day, but it was somewhat that atmosphere. It was like, live now, for tomorrow you may not be here, you may be in Vietnam. That was a rather prevalent attitude. It was also the beginning of, we were caught up into the revolution, the sexual revolution, and the things that were changing, the different morals that were evolving. It was just so different than the home life that one came from when we were thrown into this. When I say we the freshmen were thrown into a new world. And some of us coped in various ways, and others did not. Some were able to achieve academically, some were able to get by academically, and a lot fell down. Mercer was much calmer. It was a much easier existence.
When did you first think of going into science?
Basically, when I made a 99 on the first chemistry test, well, to go into chemistry, when I made a 99 on the first chemistry test, and there was a big sign across my test, "Are you registered?" And I went to talk to the professor and told her that I had transferred from one section to another. And then I realized that so many of the students in that class had done so poorly that, and it really wasn't all that hard of a test, that maybe I had some aptitude. I've been thinking, when did I think about going to graduate school? Because we're trying to motivate students to go to graduate school. I think part of my motivation to go to graduate school into science started very early. I think part of it had to do with Sputnik and then with our space program. It was a big thing that we were trying to get into space. We were trying to get to the moon. And I was part of that generation that got caught up into that. Also being the granddaughter of immigrants, I couldn't understand my grandmother on my father's side because she only spoke German. And on my mother's side, the granddaughter also of immigrants and pioneers, I felt the need to excel, the need to get into graduate study in order to excel in the sense of achieving, in the sense of having a good job and a good paying job. I was very strongly influenced by the stories of the depression both my parents went through. They married, my dad was married late. One of the reasons he couldn't have married earlier was because of the depression. They got married on January 1st of 1942, and he shipped out later that year in World War II. So I heard story after story about not being able to find a job. This is my father, and I heard story after story of eating beans and the sauerkraut that went rotten and not having any food from my mother. And the fact that her mother ran a boarding house and they didn't have anything or any money or any food, and then her father's sister's family of 7 moved in because they had even less. And I was strongly motivated not to be hungry, not to have that type of situation, to be able to go to college, which my parents were not able to finish. They both went some, but were not able to finish because of financial reasons. So their stories, and they're talking about it, and my own, I guess it was either innate or it was motivated by them, desire to excel, combine that together with the space program. All that made me steer towards science. One thing that I have found interesting, I've kept track of that group of high schoolers that were very bright. We had some who made the top score on the SAT in math. They made the 800. They just aced it out. I wasn't one of them, unfortunately. But I was valedictorian in the class, but they were able to ace out the SAT. And they did not go into science. One of them went to Ohio State as an art major and then floundered and dropped out, came back to Tampa, worked for the post office, and About 10 years after he graduated from high school, finally got a degree in mechanical engineering, a BS degree. And when I saw him this summer, after 20 years, I asked him how he liked his job. He says it's boring. Another student went into insurance. Again, very bright, math and science, my chemistry partner in high school. Another one went into English and then into public health. All these very bright, potentially scientific minds. One of them blew out on drugs and various things. All these potentially scientific people did not go into it. I have another friend who was very, very good in math and science and ended up in Yugoslavian history. I'm sure they can contribute to their fields, but what I don't understand is why we lost them. Because they're very, very bright minds and they could contribute. Why I stuck it out is I enjoyed it. It was the most fun of everything that I did. I had more fun doing that than the other courses, so I stuck it out. And never have regretted it.
How did you decide where you would go to graduate school, or why did you decide to go?
Well, I decided to go because I did not want to do the job of a BS chemist. Basically, I did not want to do routine work. I wanted to have the opportunity to decide what I wanted to do myself. Also, I can remember as a 14 or 15-year-old exploring various career opportunities, and one of them was being a psychiatrist, and I then learned that you had to have a medical degree plus 4 years plus internship and all that, and I decided that was too long, but I could certainly tack 4 years beyond a BS degree is what I decided at the time. And that's what it took me to get a PhD. It was 4 years beyond the bachelor's degree. So I had decided early on that that was one of my goals. And I didn't let anything deter me. There were a lot of things that people tried to deter me. But I guess I was just impervious to it. I just said, you know, that's their business. I'm going to do what I want to do. And so I went. Why did I go back to Florida State? Well, I was involved with the person at the time. And going from Florida State to Mercer, and from Mercer back to Florida State was involved with this person. It turned out not to be too bad of a choice. Florida State was a good chemistry graduate school. Again, if I have any criticism, they did not challenge us to the degree that they should challenge us. I tried to rectify that in my graduate courses, much to the chagrin of my students. But I think that is one of the big things that we don't do. We don't challenge people enough. People are brighter. They're more capable. They have a higher capacity for work than what we give them credit for. And during those graduate years, I could have learned more, and I regret every day that I did not, because now having to learn things on my own is much harder than in the classroom. And this is what I keep telling my students. Of course, they don't believe me, but I feel it is very true.
Did you ever come to a conclusion what made you so mature so young?
Well, I was like my dad. I was always a loner. I rarely had friends. Probably I was the only high schooler that went to high school football games with my mom and dad. I'm not saying that's good. It's not. I'm not. My husband, Larry Curtis, is the person who has taught me to be somewhat sociable. He's done a lot to teach me how to get along with people. This was not something that I ever learned. It's not something we were taught in school, though I see my child in kindergarten. They're trying to teach social behavior. We were never taught that. We were sent to school, we were sent to learn, then we were sent home, and we did not learn any social graces or how to get along with people, how to cooperate. It was just part of my own personality, but it was just also a part of the environment. I was expected. My mother had high expectations, both behavioral and achievement-wise. And part of it was because she was very, very bright and forced, because of circumstances, not to be able to achieve. She was also caught up in the after World War II syndrome, that women were to stay home. This is, I'm just learning the history of women during World War II, where they were out doing every job there was. And then all of a sudden the men came back, and then the women were forced back into the home. And she was one of these victims. She was forced back in. So she used her talents and her energies in volunteer work, which took a lot of time and brought in no money. And at the time, I resented to some degree. But she had to use her talents somehow, and she did. And she always did everything very well. Both of my parents set the example to achieve and to do a job well, not to do it halfway, but to do it well. And to answer your question, I've always felt like I was kind of born old because of my environment.
How did you choose who you worked for your degree at Florida State with?
Well, that wasn't the best type of choice, though it turned out to be a good choice. I was still involved with this person that calls me to go back to Florida State. And he was finishing up a master's sooner than I would, because he was older and he had been taking some summer courses. And so I knew I was interested in either analytical chemistry or physical chemistry. And I realized that with my background that I could get through quicker in analytical chemistry than I could in physical chemistry. And so I chose Wilson Gulick as my major professor. Well, it turns out that I broke off with the person that I was involved with, and it really didn't matter in the end. But Wilson Gulick was a very good major professor for me. He had no other students. And I had to work the whole time because he didn't have support, but that didn't hurt me either. But he had a wide range of interest, and he taught me a lot of different things, and taught me to be very flexible, which has served me well, because since that time I do analytical chemistry, but it's not my prime interest. I'm now a hybrid between a chemical engineer and a chemist. I'm somewhere in between.
How did you come to go to Auburn? Or was there some place in between?
No, there was no place in between. This sounds like a scenario of boyfriends, but I then, as in my graduate studies, I met Larry Curtis, and we developed a relationship. We went together for nearly 4 years before we got married. We got married 6 months before I got my PhD. Wilson Gulick was not, my major professor, was not a person who learned how to get along with people. He was older than I, but he was of the same caste that we did not learn any social skills. And so, even though he was a talented scientist and had brought in, at that time, a very nice piece of equipment, a big NSF grant, and had some smaller grants, he did not get tenure because the head of the analytical division really did not like him. Wilson was a little different. He kept odd hours. He was just not generally accepted by the other couple of people in the analytical division, so he caught the brunt of that. And so we learned that he did not receive tenure by my 3rd year. And I had to basically make a choice. He offered to try to get me into a couple other groups at other universities, and even maybe one there at Florida State. And I made a basic decision that I was going to stick it out with him. I was going to get my PhD and finish. Because of the way that I had started my career at Florida State, I had to get a master's and then get a PhD. And the summer that I finished up my master's research, Wilson Gulick was off taking care of his dad aunt's estate, who was evidently very rich, and it took him all summer to get it cleared up. And so I kind of wasted the summer. I had written the thesis, and he didn't look at it until he got back. But once he got back, I defended it. I took the orals for the PhD. They approved me into the PhD program. I'd already taken the comprehensive exams. And So that was about November, and I had until September 3rd to get my PhD work done. And so we had a nice project. It was a really fun project. It involved solvation of some nitroaromatic anions, and we used both ESR and NMR to study the solvation. I created the anions by electrolysis. And so, as I was telling my husband the other night, he claims he has no influence on me. And I claim he has tremendous influence, because he told me, I guess it was about December, to sit down and make a list of the experiments I was going to make, and set up a schedule to think through all the experiments that I thought that I would need to make, and set up a schedule, which I did. And then he said, now you know things can go wrong, so you may have to readjust your schedule, but every time that happens, sit down and readjust your schedule. So I listened, and I did that. And certainly things went wrong, and I had to readjust my schedule. But because of my husband's advice, I was able to get through by September 3rd, and I defended my dissertation on September 3rd. I'll never forget, it was in July sometime. I had finished all the experimental, I had done all the data reduction. It had been some pretty tough experiments, but I'd gotten it done. And my major professor said, I need your dissertation in 1 week. Of course, nothing had been written. I looked at him straight in the eye, and I said, I gulped, and I said, yes, sir. So he had my dissertation in 1 week. And I have to admit that that was very good training. I've had several assignments since then, one in particular on a major renovation project where some of the people in charge had just messed it up, and they were threatening to take all our money away from the department, the chemical engineering department at Auburn. And the vice president said to me, I want a complete program in budget in 1 week. I'd been through that trial. It had been some pretty tough experiments, but I'd gotten it done. And my major professor said, I need your dissertation in 1 week. Of course, nothing had been written. I looked at him straight in the eye, and I said, I gulped, and I said, yes, sir. So he had my dissertation in 1 week. And I have to admit that that was very good training. I've had several assignments since then, one in particular on a major renovation project where some of the people in charge had just messed it up, and they were threatening to take all our money away from the department, the chemical engineering department at Auburn. And the vice president said to me, I want a complete program in budget in 1 week. I'd been through that trial once before. I knew it could be done, and I knew if we worked hard enough we could get it done. And I said, yes, sir. And the dean was sitting there, and he kept saying, well, I hope you can do it. I hope you can do it. And I looked at him, and I said, we will do it. We have to do it. It will be done. And it was done. So but there are certain things that happen that have been very helpful in the long run. So I got my dissertation and defended. And it may not have had, the experimental work was done well, and it was done right. It may not have had all the trimmings that one might have liked, but there wasn't time for it, and they weren't absolutely necessary. And so we got a paper from it, and I went then directly to Auburn. My husband was working in Attapulgis, Georgia, while I was in graduate school for the University of Georgia, an experiment station there, and he interviewed for a job in Auburn in the summer. And there were, at that time, there still weren't not a lot of jobs for chemists without postdocs. And there was a research associate job in chemical engineering at Auburn. And I went up there and knocked on doors, and I got an offer, and I took that offer. So both he and I got jobs at Auburn. We started there October 1 of '76, and I had just defended my thesis September 3rd. So we started there. And over a period of time, my responsibilities, I was able to figure out ways to increase my responsibilities. They found a person who was willing to work hard and do the jobs that were necessary, and have become faculty there at Auburn.
How did you learn to teach the chemical engineering courses?
How am I learning? Let's not say that I've learned it all. Well, I set up a mechanism that worked for me. I'm not saying it would work for everybody, but it works for me. Some of it I would not suggest other people do. I had to do it for several reasons. One, I was a woman, the only woman in engineering. I was a chemist, but the biggest problem was that I was a woman. Auburn is a southern school, traditional, and it just doesn't like things that are different, people who are different. So I had to, at times, do things that were a little less than what I consider professional. But in order to achieve my goal, I was willing to do that. And what I did was I first started grading courses. I would sit in on the course and grade it. And then I would study the material and then teach it. After a few times of doing that, I was relieved of the grading responsibilities, and I would just sit in on the course, study the text, study the notes, and then I teach it the next quarter. And I've done that with just about every one of the courses I've taught. I've taught the energy balance course, which is a sophomore course, the thermal courses, which are junior courses, mass and heat transfer. I've taught elective, and I've taught graduate thermal this fall. Mathematics background before I could do that, but most of the undergraduate courses, it just takes a lot of effort and time. It's not anything that's beyond most people's capability.
What has been the biggest challenge so far?
From a personal viewpoint, getting over the discrimination of women in engineering at Auburn. It has been a long, hard-fought battle. It has been having to learn that no one will help you. Absolutely no one will help you. You have to do it all yourself. It was having to, I guess the hardest thing was to realize that people you work closely with will not support you. People that you've written papers with, people that you've done research with, when you've done good work, you've really, when I've really worked hard, I've done real good, what I consider good work, which people in the scientific community consider good work. It's published work. But they will not support you if the other faculty are somewhat down on you because you're a woman. A man will not come out and support a woman. And I guess I realized that, I guess I lost my innocence, and that's what really got me, was to realize that these people in the department will not stand up and state that I do good work. And then I realized that, again, for the second and third time, that I had to do it all myself, so I went and I did it. And I guess one last glimmer of hope that somewhat restored my faith in mankind was that we have a new dean who has offered to help me in the sense of providing good advice and offered to step in if absolutely necessary. But fortunately, at this time, it's not necessary. The department has voted for associate professor for me, and it's also voted for tenure. It's going up through the ranks at this point. They finally are accepting me as a person who can do the job. I had to do everything about 3 times better or 4 times better than a man. But finally, I've gotten it through to them that they cannot discriminate me because I'm a woman. That's been the hardest thing.
And the most rewarding?
Working with students.
What is it about working with students that is appealing?
They blossom. You can start with somebody who's just floundering. I've had several different experiences. One woman who did not pass her PhD qualifiers for various reasons, who got kicked out of a research group, come into my office in about 10,000 pieces, totally, completely shattered. Taking that person, giving encouragement, saying, yes, you can do it, you're bright, you can do it, and help put those 10,000 pieces back together, setting that person develop from a very clumsy researcher to a good researcher, and then seeing her get her master's degree and getting a good job. That's rewarding. Seeing our foreign students come in, hardly being able to speak a word of English, not knowing first thing about experimental, and by the time you get through 2 years of a master's, or can speak so that they can be understood and can do decent research. Then with the PhD students, I have one in particular that is just a joy. He came in hardly being able to speak English, has given a presentation at ACS regional meeting in beautiful English, came in not knowing how to do any research, and is now 3 years later, he got a master's, started a PhD. 3 years later from the start that he came in, I sat down 45 minutes, mapped out to him what his rest of his PhD dissertation needed to consist of in qualitative terms, and watch him start and take it by the horns and come up with a plan. That's the maturing process, the growing process. The feedback that you get is extremely rewarding. And just to see them learn in the classroom situation, just to see them go, like in the sophomore course I had this spring, I had a lot of repeaters, people who had failed the course before, but being willing to work with them and show them and interact with them in a question-answer period, having them open up. As a small class, we could do that. That provided a way of real reward. Come in. This is the question.
Yes.
Well, I started at Auburn in co-liquefaction as a postdoc, and of course in co-liquefaction there's always catalysis. First worked on mineral matter catalysis, and then on solvent effects, and then more recently with dispersed catalysts, using molybdenum naphthanates and other types of dispersed catalysts. And right now I'm in an interesting study and trying to understand more of what compounds like molybdenum naphthenate do in the co-liquefaction system. So I got started in catalysis through co-liquefaction.
Do you remember the first F you were forced to give someone?
The first F.
And how you felt about it?
Oh, I didn't have any trouble. Yeah, I remember it. I was in a 211 course. Or maybe it was in thermal. No, it was in thermal, 336. And there were several Fs in that course. If a student doesn't work, he's not going to get the material. He's not going to understand. He can't get the material. So he's got to work. If he refuses to work, there's no reason not to give him an F. The only ones I feel bad are the students that really work very hard and then they still can't get it. And those particular students I counsel to get out of whatever they're in and get into something that's more suited to their talent.